Have you ever felt like there's never enough time and somehow you're always behind, even when you're doing all of the things? Like, no matter how much you accomplish, there's this quiet hum that's in the background. And why does slowing down and rest feel so dangerous? That's what we're unpacking today. Welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. My guest is a licensed therapist, coach, and high-functioning anxiety expert who has spent over 15 years helping ambitious professionals break free from the cycle of anxiety, perfectionism, and burnout. And today we're getting into why is it that so many high achievers so often feel behind, even when the evidence says otherwise. And more importantly, how do we actually break that cycle and find a sustainable pace? I'm so excited about this conversation and so excited to be joined by
Tati Garcia.
Tati. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about it too.
What is it that you build and a little bit of how you got there?
Yeah, so I, like you said, specialize in helping high achievers to basically get out of their own way in a sense, and start putting themselves first. Like a lot of times the focus can be on prioritizing achievement and productivity and busyness over taking care of themselves. And that can then result in a lot of challenges like anxiety or other mental health issues, depression, but also just being really hard on yourself. I am somebody who I guess would identify as having had a high functioning anxiety, and sometimes it can still show up for me. And so I wasn't always somebody who considered myself like a high achiever, but I think once I got into grad school and started working in the field, that's when I noticed a lot of my expectations and the pressure I was putting on myself coming into play and affecting me. And so I would maybe beat myself up or want to do really well when it came to helping my clients. So there would be a lot of overthinking and anxiety before sessions and felt like I was never prepared enough or doing enough. Those patterns followed me into being self-employed. And, when you're self-employed, then there's this other aspect of nobody's telling you what to do, of course. And that shows up as maybe not having any boundaries or structure. And so you have to be even more intentional, I think, with how you're spending your time and speaking to yourself, like your personal development.
Love it. Thank you. So I want to start digging further into, like, pull apart a couple threads. And one I'd love to explore is this idea of perfectionism, how you define perfectionism and where does that usually present for people, maybe those that you're working with. I know we have a lot of listeners who are self-employed, and so we can pull those themes in as we go too.
So perfectionism is essentially when you have these expectations for things to be perfect. And a lot of times that can look like this all or nothing thinking. So like black and white of it's either perfect or it's terrible. And it can kind of put you in these patterns of feeling like it's never enough, maybe over analyzing things or spending an excess amount of time on things, like double or triple or quadruple checking everything. And perfectionism can be internal or it can be external, right? Like you may put it towards yourself and have it be on expectations you have for yourself and the way you show up. And it can also show up in maybe how you treat others. And maybe you expect perfection from your relationships or from your employees or colleagues. And it's very rigid. Like it doesn't leave a lot of room for nuance or for making mistakes or for learning, because it's kind of this pattern of expecting that everything's perfect and then feeling terrible about yourself when it isn't.
Yeah, it strikes me as almost like a false protector. Like it's there trying to protect us from perceived like negative emotion, but in fact it doesn't do what it's even intending to do, because it can, to your point, like if you're overworking, you're spending all this time, there's actually maybe other things you're not able to get to or not ship your work and ideas. And that's something that I've found in my own self journey as a, what I would say, recovering perfectionist, recovering from high functioning anxiety and things like that. A lot of the work that I did with my therapist was in that space of getting to a lot of the, like the whys and the roots, of course, behind why is there this need. And I'm curious if
Mhm.
you've seen themes of what brings people. I mean, when I think about even my friend group and my colleagues, and it just seems like there is this sense that there's so much to do. We always have this sense of feeling behind. There's more that we put on our to-do list than we can accomplish at times. What do you see are maybe some of the themes that bring people into this place of either high functioning anxiety, perfectionism, any of these kind of interconnected ideas?
Yeah, I think that it can definitely come from different places, of course, depending on the person's personal history, upbringing, experiences. And like you said, you kind of put it as this false protector. A lot of
Mhm.
times, these patterns are trying to protect us from something. Oftentimes, it can be the fear of failure, the fear of disappointment, whether it's disappointing yourself or somebody else, the fear of, not feeling good enough, or like that inner kind of lack or belief that, okay, no matter what I do, I'm not good enough. And that can be rooted in childhood experiences. So it can be influenced by the way that you were raised. So maybe if you had parents who were particularly harsh or had high expectations for you, or were inconsistent in regards to the praise that they gave you, or maybe you received no praise, or maybe you were primarily praised for your achievements, for doing well in school, or for being productive, or for getting a good job or whatever. And so maybe the focus is on what you're producing, how you are performing, and not on anything else. And so maybe there's this kind of learned pattern or behavior of, well, I'm only as good as what I do or how I perform. And then, of course, when we look at kind of like the translation from school performance to the workplace, it's not exact at all, right? Like when
Mhm.
you're performing in school and you get a good grade, it's pretty clear, it's pretty concrete. You know if you're doing well or not. Whereas that doesn't translate well to the workplace because there's so much uncertainty
Yeah.
in performance. You're not always going to get a performance review on everything that you're doing, or you're not getting a grade necessarily. And so there's a lot of room for uncertainty to question, am
Mm.
I doing enough? And that's just in the workplace, but then also in your personal life, of course, there's no grade or measure of how you're doing. That's just one example of
Mhm.
that. There's different kind of patterns that can lead to this. There's also, let's say, if somebody didn't have parents that were present, or they experienced any sort of neglect or abuse or anything, then maybe they were expected to take care of themselves, or potentially parentified, maybe taking the role of being a parent for younger siblings. And sometimes being in that role can result in feeling as though then all of the responsibility is on them. And there can be this big fear of dropping the ball, or nobody's going to look out for me if I'm not doing everything. There's a lot of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
patterns. Those are some of the main ones that I see, and then often that can result in internalizing these expectations for ourselves, and driving ourselves. And that's really what high functioning anxiety is that it's this fear of failure, this fear of dropping the ball that is driving people forward into not stopping, into continuing to be productive, into overworking themselves, into pushing themselves harder, that can ultimately result in feeling exhausted and drained and overwhelmed and potentially burnt out.
Thank you. It's so powerful to hear like those different themes and examples. And it strikes me as just like the importance of, if you want to go deeper into that, like working with the therapist, going like and doing your own work, if that's something you haven't explored before, can be so powerful. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking about even like the last example that you gave of the like child that's been over, what's the term? Parentified? Like
Parentified?
they,
Yeah.
yeah, they've become like the adult earlier. They've had to grow up too fast is another way of
Mhm.
saying it. And it strikes me as this like idea we're unpacking around urgency in this sense of like there's always more to do. I almost imagine somebody like scanning and like looking what's next, what's next, what's next, because it feels unsafe or
Mhm.
dangerous to rest and stop because they've had to be in that role. So just as kind of one example, that was making me think, okay, I can see the pattern and the connection between where that comes out in their kind of daily life. Like, is there more that you've seen around this idea of urgency? Like, and I'm not a therapist, so like I don't know if I made the connection right, but that's what I just
Mhm.
see.
Yeah, no, you definitely made the connection right that stopping or slowing down can feel unsafe.
Mhm.
It can also, in addition to feeling unsafe, it can also bring up maybe the thoughts and emotions that
Mm.
we might be unconsciously trying to avoid, right? When we have space, when we don't have time to do something, that's when we have space to think. And our thoughts, when you're somebody who is prone to thinking about things negatively or has anxiety, those thoughts, of course, tend to be the more negative things. When it comes to
Mm.
this sense of urgency, it can be something that is so automatic that people don't even recognize that they're doing it. Like, I know for myself personally, I have this tendency to rush and to feel this sense of urgency. And I'll often notice it when I go out somewhere with people. Let's say if I'm going to, because I live near Manhattan. So, like, if I'm going to the city and there's a lot of walking that needs to be done, and I'm with a group, and I'm like, find myself like rushing ahead of everybody else, and I'm looking behind, I'm like, why are they going so slow? And I'm like, wait, why am I rushing? Like, there's no reason to be rushing. And it's just something that's like the default mode kind of. And
Mm.
I think sometimes people can get stuck in these patterns and not even question them, like, right? Even if it's just as simple as you're getting up to go to the bathroom and you find that you're like kind of speeding there, or you're feeling this like urgency before you even start your work day, feeling like, well, everything needs to be done immediately, or everything becomes a fire that needs to be put out. And so, really, what this is coming from is it's a learned pattern, but it's also often fueled emotionally, right? Because there's this underlying current of oftentimes anxiety or worry. Then maybe you're kind of worried, oh, if I don't get things done quickly enough, then my boss is going to be upset with me, or my clients are going to think that I'm not competent, or my family's going to think I don't care about them, or whatever it is. And so those fears and worries are then kind of like driving this behavior of feeling like everything's an emergency and needs to be done immediately, when really that's not accurate, right? Because not everything's an emergency, not everything needs to be done right away. And when you're kind of functioning in that state, you're oftentimes neglecting other things, like I was talking about earlier, like taking care of yourself or taking breaks or even just functioning in that way. I like to say that it's not necessarily what we're doing, but it's the way we're doing things. That's kind of, it creates this feedback loop. Like, it's reinforcing the idea that if you're rushing through things, then your body is kind of getting the message of, oh, something's wrong. We need to continue to pump these stress hormones through your body, or whatever is happening physiologically.
Mm. Tati, one of the things that I think is interesting about, these patterns and this, loop you're talking about is I find it's also reinforced by society and by employers and by clients and by even family. And so how and maybe even a step further into that, like how do you separate out maybe ambition and hard work and just like good work ethic from when it goes too far and when it becomes in this place of either high functioning anxiety that's underneath that and driving it? Like how do you help people separate out that? Because we know like working hard can be a great thing and can be how our entrepreneurs make their businesses work. And so is it a switch that we can like turn off and on, like when we need it? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it can definitely be influenced and reinforced by society, and oftentimes that behavior is praised, right? When you're the one who everybody can depend on, or who always gets things done, who is very detail oriented, those are things that are absolutely positive traits that are can start to become expected from others, right? So it can sometimes create this loop of like, be the one who does the best and kind of get like punished, quote unquote, with more
Yeah.
work.
The curse of
um
competence.
yeah, exactly. And so it's not to say that ambition is something that is bad or needs to be avoided at all, but it's about recognizing that we all have our limits, and also exploring what's driving that ambition. So sometimes people can be aiming for certain goals just for the pursuit of a goal, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like,
Mhm.
maybe they're not necessarily thinking about what it is that they want for themselves and for their life, but they're just thinking, well, I just need to get the next step. Like, I just need to move up the ladder. I just need to make more money. And those are in and of themselves not bad goals to have. But I think it can help to explore, how does that connect personally for you? What is the intention for you? Can you be more specific with what you're working towards? Because I think ambition just for the sake of achieving more, it kind of becomes this constant pursuit of dopamine, essentially, right? Like, you're constantly pursuing the high that can come from accomplishing something or having something positive happen, but then that can become a roller coaster of kind of the ups and downs of your
Mhm.
mood being dependent upon what you're achieving. And then when things aren't going well, then you feel really bad about yourself. And maybe you beat yourself up, or maybe you take that personally, like, what's wrong with me? And also, I think that can then kind of lead to this pattern that I often see in high achievers of something positive happens, you're not even recognizing it, you're just immediately on to the next thing.
Mm.
And so they're not taking time to celebrate what's going well and actually enjoy what you're working for. And so then it's kind of like, well, then what's the point of working towards this if you're not even gonna enjoy it or acknowledge that it's happening?
It's so powerful. First of all, it was making me think originally of this meme on social media where it was like I accidentally got important at work and then it showed the meeting calendar of like back to back to back to back. So I think this is
Mm.
something that we do in our work culture of just like more and more responsibility must equal better. And so like to your point, pausing and thinking about, is this what I want? Like, do everybody pushes to scale businesses? And so for our solopreneurs that are trying to kind of make things work, really thinking about what do we want our business to be? What do we want the impact to be made in the world or in our community or in our space, versus just assuming that it is like, maybe for some people it is scale and you do want to grow and employ more people and that is a way to spread your impact, but also for others it might be like you have enough where you are. And I like the idea of being where your feet are and thinking about whether that is when I'm in kind of work mode or mom mode or friend mode, trying to keep my mind and my body in that place. That has been a helpful kind of mantra for me. But I want to go into now. So let's say somebody has, kind of figured out and are starting to understand some of the patterns that you've described, in this sense of urgency or overworking, kind of the overachieving side of perfectionism or high functioning anxiety. How do you help people create the boundaries and systems and understanding of what it means to still like work with excellence, but have things in their proper place? Like, what is I think the phrase like work life balance and all of that is really tricky and oversimplified. How do you like to think about pulling these pieces apart to get to a life that really is flourishing and thriving for people who do also want excellence?
You can have balance and ambition at the same time. Those seem like two competing ideas, right? Like if you have ambition, then you're constantly working towards something, and balance is the idea that in theory, it's like you have a split between your personal and professional, or in reality and in practice, balance to me is not necessarily about having this split between things, but it's about being able to readjust. And a lot of times that can look like going through seasons, right? So maybe there's a time at work when things are busier, but you're taking time maybe to pull back and rest and recharge after, or to focus more on your family after, or it's not necessarily about this perfect split or about letting go of ambition completely, but it's about kind of recognizing that you can't be full throttle 100% of the time, and that's okay. And, that can look like setting boundaries. I think boundaries can be very helpful, as far as concrete boundaries with, okay, what time are you going to start and end work, or communicating boundaries with colleagues or with clients as far as expectations. That can help to take some of the mental load off of yourself if you maybe tend to have that sense of urgency. If, for example, you feel like, I need to get this project to a client immediately, that can add a lot of pressure. But if you're communicating, okay, I'll get back to you within 2 business days, then that is clarifying a boundary, so that not only can you have some breathing room, but so that there's clear expectations on both ends, for example. And boundaries can also look like scheduling time for yourself, right? Like you mentioned that calendar full of meetings. It's obviously very common to schedule meetings and work tasks and all of that in our calendar, but people don't often schedule things like breaks or, you know, uh, personal morning routines or time spent for yourself or with your loved ones. And so scheduling and setting aside that time can help to keep you to more accountable to taking that time for yourself, and recognizing that taking that time for yourself is what is fueling your ambition or creativity or whatever, like that. Not to say that, because sometimes it can be sticky to think of that you're just resting so that you can do more work,
Yeah.
because then that creates this relationship where it's like rest is only functioning as fueling your work. Rest in and of itself is something that's so important, so valuable, regardless of how productive you are. Like every human deserves to and needs to rest. And one thing that I notice a lot is there can be a lot of guilt that comes up around rest. Whatever that looks like, that can look like so many different things. It can look like literally taking passive rest and like laying on the couch and doing nothing. It can look like active rest, going for a hike or doing something you enjoy. Those things are important to not just enjoy your life, but also to help you to have charge your battery so that you can be present and basically fuel that ambition. And so kind of connecting it with what I was saying earlier, getting clear on what your why is, what the reasons that you have behind what you're doing and what you're working for, and then creating kind of boundaries around that, in addition to time for fueling and taking care of yourself.
I have like a whole page of notes over here that from all of that. I'm curious, when you were talking about passive rest and active rest, from your perspective, are people wired for a preference there, or maybe even kind of indoctrinated into one of those, or are they both equal? Do you need some of both? How do you think about that?
I think a lot of times it can be habitual, what we tend to go towards. And maybe there can be a lot of judgments around certain kinds of rest. At the same time, it's important to recognize that, coming back to that sense of balance, like I always like to think of moderation, right? Like if you're spending all of your time, like thinking about how what you're doing is making you feel. if you are spending your time doom scrolling and feeling terrible about yourself and about the world afterwards, like, is that really restful? Like, it may be something that is uh, numbing your mind and like helping you to disconnect mentally and just kind of, do something that you're not necessarily actively thinking about. But it's important to think of, how is this making me feel when it comes to the rest that you're doing? And I think that can also depend on kind of what you feel as though you're needing in the moment. One way that is helpful to think about it is the pairing of having a regulated nervous system with rest. This is something that I heard from somebody on my podcast that was a guest on my podcast. So it was like a mind blown moment for me of, if you are sitting watching TV or something, or even going on a walk, and your mind is spinning with what you have to do next, or stressing about what is on your plate, or something that just, ruminating over a meeting that just happened, then you're not kind of experiencing a regulated nervous system. You're in this state of fight or flight. And so that's not necessarily going to be restful. It's going to be something that is maybe making it difficult to recharge, to be present. So that can go both ways, right? Like,
Mm.
if we're in a state where our nervous system is deactivated, like kind of down regulated, where maybe we're in a paralyzed state or a numb state, maybe you're feeling frozen because you have a lot of decisions to make and you're in this kind of freeze state of, I don't know what to do, or you're feeling overwhelmed, then doing something that's maybe more active could help you to get out of that state. So whether that's, like I mentioned, going for a walk or getting outside. And so there's no like hard and fast rule. I think it can help to think about and ask yourself, what is it that I need in this moment? And a big part of that I think is very important for anything that I've been sharing today is building the muscle of actually listening to yourself.
I really like that idea of thinking about where our nervous system is. And if I'm overwhelmed and I might need something more calming and bringing things down, versus if I'm
Mhm.
stuck, maybe I need to physically move, and how that could help me mentally move too. I've found I
Yeah.
used to be the like runner that had some sort of learning podcast in my ear so that my run could be double productive. Like that's where I was at,
Mhm.
Tati, like in the past Tracy.
Mhm.
And now I do long runs in nature without any input. There's enough happening up here for enough input. And
Mhm.
I sort through so many things. It's that liminal space that I now understand that I need, where I can solve complex work challenges or relational challenges, whatever it is, to just think through without like an agenda. But one of the things you said earlier too that strikes me is I do think I've made a sort of trade-off to say, like, rest can be productive for the future of work. So I might need to explore that further later. But I think it is a helpful starting place for somebody that definitely overworked in the past to at least now understand. This is where I think I'm at on my journey of like understanding the value for me. And I've done a lot of work in particular around something you started with, that was people being valued not only for what they do, but who they are. You made a comment around like the value of achievement. And so I think that's been one of the central like seed points for me of recognizing just inherent worth, which seems so obvious. And yet, when society and parents and colleagues, like, it is constantly about what can be seen and what can be achieved, because I think that's more measurable. It's easier to see and recognize. I don't know if any of that resonates for what you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes it can be referred to as like this core limiting belief that many of us have, that I'm not good enough, that maybe was rooted in some past experience where you were shamed for something, or picked on, or criticized, or something happened. And it doesn't always have to be one incident, of course, but kind of that reinforces this story that we tell ourselves, that I'm not good enough. And then that can unconsciously cause us to seek things that will help us feel enough. And society and others around us, like you said, kind of can go to those measurable things of, look at the diplomas that I have, or the money that I make, or the house that I have, or whatever that looks like. Another piece of what you said that I think is valuable is you mentioned, like, rather than defaulting to going on a run and listening to something that's educational and needing to be productive, right? Like, this productivity kind of, this need to continually do more, and like the overs, like I like to call them, like you mentioned, the overworking, overachieving, isn't just limited to work. Oftentimes it bleeds over into personal life and personal pursuits. And that can look like then kind of making something that the intention was to take care of yourself and create time for yourself, or whatever that is. And then it becomes into this competition or this measurement, whether it's with yourself or with others. Then the perfectionism, the rigidity can move into that realm. And that makes it less of something that you're doing for yourself that you're enjoying. And it becomes another source of stress, right? Like, then if you don't listen to the podcast when you're running, or if you miss the run, then you beat yourself up and are like, what's wrong with me? How come I can never stick to things? And it kind of pulls up this story of not enoughness. And then I think that component of just allowing for space can help our minds to unconsciously work through things, but while also recognizing the caveat of, when somebody has anxiety, sometimes the tendency is to ruminate, to catastrophize, to go to those negative thoughts. And so practices that help to cultivate self-awareness can help you to shift out of that, so that you're allowing your unconscious mind to do what it needs to help you to process things and solve problems, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Ooh, can we talk more about that last part? So you're talking
Mhm.
about, like, so sometimes space and like that margin can feel dangerous to somebody who has high functioning anxiety, because it's in that place where you pause, your mind can just go. What are some of the ways you do shift out of in that pause and rest to this place of using that space for, working towards, for lack of a better term right now, like that balance or that regulation?
The first step is being able to recognize that it's even happening.
Yeah.
So starting to become more aware of the way that you think. And so this can happen just by, an intentional practice of, let's say, setting an alarm for 3 times a day and asking yourself, okay, what was I thinking about,
Mhm.
or what were my thoughts like?
Mhm.
And seeing if those thoughts are actually accurate or reflective of reality.
Mm.
Again, going back to like a practice like meditation, journaling, therapy can be helpful tools, because that's kind of helping you to recognize and practice more what is going on in our minds, right? Because when we aren't looking at or recognizing what we're thinking, then I like to think of it as, it becomes kind of like this kind of soup of just like,
Yeah.
swirling thoughts that tend to turn into this downward spiral. And oftentimes we have a lot of practice in the negative, because we have a negativity bias as humans. So that is meant to protect us from danger. But oftentimes, and especially in our modern world, we're not confronted with danger on a regular basis. And the dangers are perceived threats of, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my house, my partner is going to divorce me, whatever those fears
Mm.
are, then that can create a lot of opportunity for us to then try and anticipate or predict these negative outcomes, and think about all these possible negative scenarios that are oftentimes inaccurate, or it's not the
Mm.
whole picture. It's not that these negative things never happen, but it's that anxiety is making us feel as though the more we think about it, the more we kind of rehearse these things, the better prepared we'll be for them, or the more information we'll have. Our brain is kind of trying to cope with uncertainty and unpredictability by thinking through things and trying to figure them out. And of course, high achievers are excellent problem solvers and fixers. And so that can kind of feed into that of I need to fix this and figure this out. But not everything is, especially if it's something that hasn't happened yet, then you can't fix it. You can't figure it out. And so that just kind of reinforces the thoughts rather than helping you to feel better. And so if you can recognize when, oh, there is kind of this anxious voice coming up, trying to prepare me for this negative thing that could or couldn't happen, then asking yourself, is this helping me? Are these thoughts helping me to approach this problem? Or is it maybe just causing me to feel more worried, more fearful, more tense? And what would be a different way of looking at this, of the whole picture of what could happen, right? Like it's easy to say what could go wrong, and we don't very often think of what could go right. And so even shifting that lens to what if things go right, or what if they're just neutral, and that's okay, and recognizing that you can handle it. A lot of times the anxiety comes from this fear that this is going to be so intolerable that I won't be able to handle it and my world's going to fall apart. And I'm sure that you, Tracy, and the listeners have been through many things that have felt like it's going to be the end of the world, and you've survived it and you've surpassed it and you've coped with it. And so that is going to continue to happen. Like something that feels like this end of the world scenario so often. And unless it's something that kills you, right? Like you can cope with it, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's challenging.
That's so powerful. That whole thread that you just had is so powerful. I think a couple things that stood out to me was I recognized some of my own journey in my own work that I did there. And in particular, I want to pull out the part where you talked about being able to notice and name when it's happening. I want to start there for a second, because I think this was a big part of my own healing in this area, was being able to, and for a while with my therapist, we even personified it. Like the other kind of voice had like a name.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds interesting, but like that helped me to separate out, okay, this internal Tracy is here, is a part of me. She's trying to help, but it's not actually helping in where I'm trying to go. And so being able to, I was also thinking in that, like that ability for, high functioning, kind of this overachiever, a lot of times, like you have the minds that can work a step ahead, and that can work really well in the proper boundaries. It's why I'm a really great consultant. Like I can see the strategy, I can see ahead when used in its proper place. I can also see all the potential problems and like peer around the corners, which can be good to mitigate risk. And yet in other environments like personal life or like overthinking when it's out of its place, I can now recognize when I'm operating in that other Tracy mentality, and now say basically, thanks, but I've got it. Like, and I think the shift of why the personification was helpful for me was I used to try to like push it away instead of recognizing that is part of me that is trying to help. And at a different point in my life from my own life journey, it was necessary. And so, but it was an adaptation that was no longer serving me. And so rather than like that, again, push away that integration and saying, now I can kind of make this shift to say, how do I operate from a place of like groundedness and safety, security, knowing I am enough in and of myself, whether this project works or not, whether this friendship works or not, whether my children get A's or C's, like, and any of those things, understanding that those are not threats to who I am and that separation. And then also to your point of like, you can handle it. I think that's so encouraging, because what I've found being an effective next kind of step in that moment of recognizing is telling myself reminders of my own resilience, my own, even when it was, bottom of the barrel or whatever, those hard moments, how I worked back from that, or, my community rallied around us and worked our way forward. Because sometimes it is kind of the even if moments, like those are real things that happen in life. And maybe our listeners are there in that spot. And I hope they hear some encouragement of like, you can get through it to the other side. That doesn't mean alone, though, to Tati's point earlier, like all of the different things that you have as options to go towards. You were talking about meditation practice, therapy. I'd add to that, like outreach to your community and friends to not be in it alone.
Yeah, very well said. And I think that's an important piece that you mentioned of, community and support. That's so essential. And so often individuals who are ambitious, maybe you're somebody who is, like they say, it gets lonely at the top. So maybe you are a solopreneur or a CEO or whatever that looks like. And that can feel like you don't have support. So that's when it's even more important to reach out for a support system, personally, professionally. I think both can, of course, be helpful. And even just having a place to share your thoughts, your feelings, to feel heard. It's not necessarily that these support systems are always going to solve all of your problems, because that's not the point of it, but it's about having a space where you can verbalize what's going on for you and have kind of like a container to feel heard and recognize, and maybe even people that can relate to what you're going through. That can be really powerful.
I like that language of container to feel. Like friendships and community is a container to feel. Like that's really beautiful language. I like it. So as we've been talking about high functioning anxiety, this sense of urgency, really thinking about rest as the powerful and necessary thing that it is, what would you say if only people knew with what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that if only people knew that you don't need to be so hard on yourself, be in such this hurried state to function through life, to get things done. It's possible to let go of this weight, this kind of excess stress, and that's often unnecessary, and realize that those strengths are still within you to perform in the way that you'd like to be there for other people, whatever it is that is important to you. And these external kind of manifestations of urgency or anxiety, it's oftentimes just kind of shrouding those strengths and not fueling them.
Beautiful. Tati, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work, your podcast, any of that?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Calmly Coping. So you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts, also on YouTube. And my website is becalmwithtati.com. And I also have a free high functioning anxiety quiz if anybody resonates with or is wondering, do I have high functioning anxiety? So you can take that at hfaquiz.com.
Wonderful. Tati, thank you so much for this conversation. I think so many of these ideas and insights are going to resonate with folks. And if they clicked on this episode, I'm assuming that, there was something about this idea of feeling behind that you've really helped us think about and unpack. And I think it's going to be really valuable for our listeners. And for our listeners, if this resonated with you and you want to go deeper and keep reflecting, you can click on any of those links that Tati was talking about. We're going to put those for her work in the episode description. And you can also join the Building Thinkers newsletter. So for each episode that we have, we build a blueprint for thought. And the idea behind that was, I felt like sometimes you listen to episodes or you read a book, but where's the practical, like how do you put it into action? So these blueprints for thought are simply taking the insights from these conversations. I create this reflection activity so you can put it into practice in your own life. So I'll do that for this episode. And if you want access to those, you can join our newsletter, which we'll also put in the show notes. So thank you so much again, Tati. And thank you to our listeners. We'll listen in next time.
Thank you so much.